Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovid. Today we're on lesson 49. We only have one left to go. Thank you so much for being with us, during all this time. And I hope that it's really taught you a lot about how we function as human beings. When we started, we talked a lot about the brain. Why? Because God has created us in such a marvelous way. And it's important to know why we do the things we do and how the brain works and how God intervenes with us. We talked about the Holy Spirit. Well, today we're going to be talking about emotional relearning, part 4. We're going to talk about changing our memories, the interpretations of our memories, the things we believe in our memories. And if we can change our memories, we can change our life. And it's going to get a little technical today. And so I encourage you, if you want to, go back to those first lessons. Look at the things that we talked about the brain again if you want to. And you may need to listen to this a second time, and that's okay. I encourage you to get the notes. If you don't have the notes, write me at ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send you the notes. So many times we're locked into believing negative things about ourselves and about others and about life itself, sometimes about God, right? And in this lesson, we're going to explore the concept of emotional relearning the truth for ourselves. Lies that we believe about ourselves are often hard to let go of. And that's because they were brought to us with emotional force. And this is especially true when we were children. Remember a couple lessons ago we talked about how do we learn. And as children, we first start out learning emotionally. And then we learn socially where all that is reinforced. And we start to really change our mind and start thinking more rationally about things, not till about 12 years old, and it continues right till about 22, 3, 4, depends upon the person. And that means that a lot of the things that we're believing about ourselves were really created in our mind as children. And so if we're going to stop believing some of that, sometimes it helps to go back to that original source and really find out what the truth was there. And that truth, as the Lord says himself, will set us free. And so that's important, okay? Now, in this lesson, and actually in the next one to come too, we're going to learn how to go to significant memories where the emotional lie was, and we're going to bring relevant and convincing truth to contradict it. That's called reconsolidation. And we'll learn to change our what, our why, our various beliefs that we've been locked into, and that causes us to react in certain ways. Much scientific proof has been changing the interpretation of our memories for a while. We've learned about memories, we talked about it, and now we know even more than we ever have before. And we've learned a lot in the 15 years since I started this program, and it's exciting to see how other authors now are writing about it. Courtney Armstrong, in her book, Rethinking Trauma Treatment, Attachment, Memory Reconsolidation, and Resilience. She's went to many of the authors that I've already started, that I've quoted on in years previous, and she writes about this. And I'm excited to see that other scientists are confirming what we've been teaching in this class. And she says this: trauma is a disorder of the memory. Now you may be thinking, okay, I understand why the emotional brain may want to suppress the thinking brain during a life-threatening event. But why does it seem to keep doing this after the event is over, or cause us to overreact to things that aren't actually life-threatening? And that's a key. It has to do, she says, with the way the brain forms implicit memories, if you recall when we talked about it, are memories that are outside of our awareness. All right, they're there. The amygdala, that part of the brain, has remembered sensations like tone of voice, right? The look on the face, body posture, things, certain words, certain events, which create in us this sense of danger, because at one time it caused us a lot of trouble, and so it remembers that. And so it forms implicit and, of course, explicit. Explicit is out of, things that we are aware of, right? Things that are in our conscious awareness. And so it creates those memories. And during emotionally stressful encounters, she says, the amygdala encodes all the sensory information. That's what I was talking about, right? This tone of voice, the look on the face, the body posture, all those sensory information associated with the event into what is called implicit memory. Anytime then that the amygdala detects anything similar to the original traumatic event, it is primed to activate this encoded programming instantly. And that's post-traumatic stress, right? That's what happens when a person, all of a sudden, the old classic example, the person that was in Vietnam War, and then he's in years later, he's in a store and a car backfires, and now all of a sudden he thinks he's back in the jungle, right? And he's reacting as if he was back there to danger, right? And that's what happens. Now, what happens in trauma is that cortisol is pumped through the body, right? Because it's danger, right? And the cortisol, we got to get ready. And that interferes with the brain's ability to form explicit memories during extreme stressful responses. And she continues and says, thus sensory cues associated with a traumatic experience stay locked in the implicit memory and fail to be integrated with the context and knowledge contained up here in the higher cortical regions. So otherwise, we don't have the benefit of the prefrontal cortex being online to really explain what's happening. Fear of the basement, right? I don't want to go in the basement because there's a monster there. Well, the prefrontal cortex didn't think of that, right? It was that limbic area, that emotional area that believes that. Now, another person, Bruce Eckert, he's written a lot on this, and it's really technical, but I want to read a little bit of it. But he has a classic book, and it came out back years ago, called Unlocking the Emotional Brain. And he talks about how we changed our mind about memories. He says in 2004, reconsolidation of memory researchers early inference that memory reactivation alone de-establishes a memory's neural circuits was overruled. Now what he says there is that when we think of a memory, the neurons become unmyelinated. And so now they're subject to change if we do it in the right way. Being different memory, though, was overruled. We used to think, well, there we go. What they said instead is that they determined the critical difference, additional difference experience must take place while the memory is reactivated. All you're doing is reactivating a memory. If you want to change it, then he says the second experience consists of a novel perception that mismatch. That is, deviate dramatically from what the reactivated target memory expects and predicts about the way their world functions. The studies have shown that the mismatch can either be a full contradiction and disconfirmation of the memory or a new, novel, dramatic variation of the target memory. Now I know that's scientific. I encourage you to go back and read that again. But what they're saying is that when we reactivate a memory, if all of a sudden we remember something else about that memory, maybe we were thinking we were in danger and all of a sudden we realized we weren't. Or maybe someone said something bad about us and that now as we're more mature, we remember the memory and we say, that wasn't true. That wasn't my fault. Well, that contradicts what we believed in the memory. That contradicts the memory. And so it's mismatched what the brain expects when it remembers that, right? I'm remembering a memory. I felt like I was stupid. And then all of a sudden I come to realize, hey, that wasn't my fault. I wasn't acting stupid. My parent was out of sync there. Well, that's a mismatch. That's a whole different meaning, you see. And that's a different interpretation of what happened. And that then causes a new interpretation of the memory. And now it goes back, remyelinated into a different interpretation of the memory. And that's reconsolidation. When we think of a memory, that's consolidation. When we change it, it's a reconsolidation of the memory. And that's really exciting stuff, because that then means that we don't have to be victim anymore of those things, those erroneous beliefs that we believed when we were so young. So they're saying in step 1 is to go back and remember a memory. Step 2 is to bring new knowledge, truth to the memory. The knowledge must contradict the conclusions and predictions made at the time of the memory. But the knowledge here, now this is important, must be powerful, convincing, must be credible, and most of all, believable. You know, your dad may have hit you and you said, you know, I wish you were never born. How traumatic would that be, right? Well, we can't go back and say, well, gee, he was giving us an ice cream cone. I mean, some people try to, you know, think that that might help, and that might help an attitude perhaps, but that doesn't reconsolidate the memory, okay? Later you'll be triggered again because you really haven't reconsolidated that memory. You've just created a new memory. And what we want to do is reconsolidate that original memory. And so it's important that it's something that is convincing, it's credible, right? And it's believable. So we have learned an emotionally learned conclusion about ourselves. It's either true or not, right? And most of the time, because an immature child concluded it, it's an exaggeration or false and unwarranted conclusion. But we don't know that when we're acting out. We act as if it's true. So we need to extinguish that belief by believing another truth that's contradictory to that. And the goal of emotional relearning is more than just an extinction of a memory. Rather, we want to emotionally relearn the truth. Now, we looked last time at flipping the script, and sometimes that's good enough. We know the lie, we come and we find out what the truth is. We call on our witnesses to contradict it. And that's one way of redoing the truth. The other way that we're talking about today is going back into a memory. And she has a great example in the book here, and I've written it out for you. And I encourage you again, if you don't have the notes, write me at ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send them to you. And in her book, Courtney Armstrong writes this. She talks about her dog. And she says, Rocky was a large chow chow who was quite temperamental and had already bitten 2 of our friends in the 9 months since we rescued him. We should have removed him from our home, but my mom was determined to rehabilitate him. Well, then she goes into the story and how she was preparing Rocky for a walk. And the elderly next door neighbor stepped into our yard, said hi, and Rocky snarled, right, and attempted to charge toward the man. And so she pulled back on the leash. The man was terrified. I yelled, she said, no, and yanked Rocky's choke collar forcefully, pulling him toward me as hard as I could. And she says, Rocky didn't like that one bit. He turned, dug his teeth into my abdomen, then lunged toward my throat, knocking me down. Feeling helpless to stop him, she says, I curled into the fetal position, wrapped my arms around my neck, and covered my head with both hands. Rocky continued to bite and pull at my arms until my brother lured him away with slices of Oscar Mayer bologna, his favorite treat. Meanwhile, our neighbor called animal control. Well, she continues the story. She says, when animal control arrived, they demanded that we put Rocky down. But my mother, she says, was completely distraught by the thought of ending Rocky's life and became hysterical. She begged animal control not to take him, insisting that Rocky was a good dog and that I must have done something to trigger him. I was shocked. Did my mom think I caused the attack? Did she want animal control to take me away instead of him? I looked away, trying to hide my angry tears, but caught a glimpse of my bloody shirt and mangled arms instead. Nausea welled up from my stomach and the ground started spinning. My legs gave way. I fainted next to the azalea bush in our front yard. Upon my collapse, my mom immediately rushed me to the hospital for treatment. My physical wounds were healed, but the emotional wounds from her insensitive comments continued to weep. Within weeks, she wanted to get another dog. When I angrily protested, I told her I still felt scared of dogs. She chided, "You got to get back on the horse that threw you, girl." Well, then the story continues. Her mother proceeded to try to help her systematically become desensitized to that attack. She started taking her to go see other dogs, bringing dogs home for a visit, having her read books from the Humane Society, learning about dogs. But she says this, she said, whatever it did, it didn't work. Because no matter what happened, I still felt that she believed, I was to blame. And it sent these implicit memories to me that I caused the attack. My feelings don't matter. My mom loves dogs more than me. I do not feel safe at home. Now, on a rational level, she says, I knew it wasn't true, but it felt true. And isn't that so true about the lies that we believe? We know that we're not a piece of garbage. We know that intellectually. That's what you would tell someone else. You're not garbage. We would say that to ourselves, and yet we feel that. That's why it's so important we ask ourselves, what did you feel in that memory? What did you feel was true? Because a lot of times they're felt beliefs, and it's hard to change those. They're emotional beliefs. And she said, on a rational level, I knew it wasn't true, but it felt true. And feelings are all that matters to the emotional brain. Well, it's a great example about herself. And I encourage you to reread it. I underlined some of the important parts. But here's the example of the memory reconsolidation. And that's why I'm putting this story in here. She says, my dog phobia didn't abate until my cousin came to visit us a year later. A dog lover like my mom, she asked us where Rocky was. My mom looked down and wrung her hands, and I proceeded to tell the horrific story. When I tearfully, now see, she's recalling a memory here, and it's emotional. She's tearful, right? When I tearfully confessed that I believed my mom blamed me for the incident. Now, do you think she's crying because the dog attacked her, or because her mom blamed her? No doubt because her mom blamed her. That hurt worse than the attack, right? And the feeling that the mom isn't going to keep her safe. All those things. She's getting tearful, and she goes, I confessed I believed my mom blamed me for the instance. When I said that, my mom's eyes widened, and her jaw dropped open. She shook her head as she reached over to hug me and said, no, Courtney, I don't blame you. Rocky was a rescue that was probably abused. Somewhere in his life, he learned to fiercely defend himself if someone suddenly moved toward him. I'm so grateful that you had the courage to stop him from attacking our neighbor and found the strength to protect yourself. You handled the situation correctly. I blame myself for the instance. I should have never brought a dog home with those tendencies. We don't need another dog. You need to feel safe in this house. Wow. She couldn't believe it. And just like that, she said, my mom reconsolidated the traumatic memory. Within a few weeks, my fears remitted and I felt ready to get a new dog, howbeit a smaller breed that we could train. To unlearn my fear, my emotional brain didn't need to be exposed to more dogs. That's just another memory, right? I needed an experience that confirmed my mom still loved me, valued my feelings, and would prioritize my safety. That was an emotional relearning. And we can do that early on. You've got children, they come home and you say, Johnny there, and he's distraught. What's the matter, Johnny? And he tells you what happened on a bus, how a kid was picking at him and how they called him names. And he goes, well, what are you believing? That happened. How does that make you feel? And he goes, I feel like I'm stupid. I feel like I'm not wanted. I have no friends. Nobody likes me. Right there, that memory has been opened. And you have a 5-hour window, they say. A 5-hour window where that can be reconsolidated. And right there, you have the opportunity to get on your knees, look at Johnny and say, no, Johnny, that's not true. You're a wonderful young man. Something's wrong with those kids. You're not stupid. Look at the grades you've gotten. And you do have friends. A lot of people love you. And right there, you reconsolidate that memory with a new, fresh interpretation that's true. And so we've learned now, Bruce Eckert continues talking about how the 2 steps of being reactivated and then mismatched by a novelty or a contradiction. And then the 3rd step is the target learning was completely or partially rewritten by the new learning. And he says within a 5-hour reconsolidation window. And that's important. It's important. We reactivate. We then mismatch with the truth, and that erases that old learning. And so, in emotional learning, through memory reconsolidation, we go back to a memory, right? Where we have this interpretation of ourself that's negative, and then we go ahead and reprocess. Now, there's different ways that we can do that. The first could just be searching in our own mind. What am I believing negative about myself? And we can ask ourselves, when did I first believe that? Can I think of a time when I believed that? And you may get back to a truth right there. You've been thinking this and feeling it long enough, and it's not going to be hard to go back. And then we can go back and work on the memory. And in the next lesson, we're going to talk about how do we do that. Second way, sometimes, and especially spiritually, we can ask the Lord. The Lord himself wants us to know the truth. He doesn't want us to believe lies. Lies come from the enemy, right? He's the author, the father of lies. We don't want to believe lies about ourselves. And so we can say, Lord, help me understand. What am I believing? What are some of the lies I'm believing? Now, he's not going to force you to go back to something you don't want to feel, something you don't want to remember. But sometimes just asking the Lord to do that, and then breathing and relaxing, you'll be surprised how he might bring something to your mind. And the third way is to take an event, a recent event, where you were over-emoting. You were over-emotional compared to what was going on. It was out of proportion. And so it's coming from another place. When our emotions are out of proportion to the event, it's coming from another place. And so we need to be able to go back. And so what we can do is rethink about that memory. And when we do, we can then allow ourselves to go back to where we felt that way before. And so what we can do is we can ready ourselves. If we know an instance now, we can think of something. Oh yeah, I remember my boss yelled at me. He was upset with a project I did, and it really, really shook me up. I felt like I was going to be abandoned. I felt like I was going to die. Well, there you go. There's a great example, right? And so I want you then to go back to that memory. Now, I put a step 2, and that is sometimes to relax, give the time over to God, and think of something joyful first. Now, we do that because that puts our relational circuits on, and the memory then can be reconsolidated. In the psychologist's world, they said why emotions are believed to affect the transformation of events into memories at the point of encoding, our mood while trying to recall events at a later date can affect the ability to access those memories. In a joyous mood, we may be able to better remember the events. And so you don't want to just focus, you want to remember the memory, the boss yelled at you, but then all of a sudden ready yourself. Think of, maybe when mom gave you a big hug, or maybe one of your children ran up to you and said, I love you, Daddy, and now you're ready. And then you want to recall the incidents, and you want to feel it. Where were you? Were you in his office? Were there other people around? What were you wearing? And you want to just really feel what, did you feel it in the stomach, in the arms? Where did you feel that? And then you want to just let that go, back to a place where you felt that way before. I believe it's like fingerprints. That set of emotions is coming from a past emotional experience, and therefore it has similar fingerprints. And you will be amazed how many times you can come back to a memory like that. And I encourage you to write it down. Write it down where you won't forget, because you'll be surprised how fleeting those memories can be. And so you want to do it. Now, we've done that before. You've been walked past a bakery and smell apple pie, and all of a sudden you remembered Grandma when she used to make the apple pie on Thanksgiving. Or maybe you were on the radio and all of a sudden you heard a song and it took you back to the junior high dance. Well, we can do things like that, right? And so we come to that experience as we're over-emoting to. We feel it, we sense it, and then we just allow ourselves to go back to a memory, and then we write it down. Next time we'll be talking, what do we do then with that new memory? How do we find out truth? How do we reconsolidate the memory? Just like she did. She told the story about the dog to her cousin, and her mom was there, the one that knows the truth. She repented. She said, no, that's not true. Here's the truth. I love you. You did the right thing. I'm going to protect you. This is a safe environment. It wasn't your fault. And right there, that was reconsolidated. That changed the meaning, and it changed how she viewed her mother, her home situation, and perhaps life even itself. That's what we want for you. These things that cause us to lack emotional resilience. These things that keep coming up, we want to be able to emotionally relearn the truth, and we're going to do that next time. Now, here's your homework. I want you to try to think of a recent episode where you were out of proportion emotionally to the event. I want you to feel what you're feeling and see if you can let it take you back to a memory. Don't be discouraged if it doesn't. That's okay. You can try again later. But if you do go back to a memory, then I want you to write it down, okay? And we'll look at that next time when we get together.